Hello. Welcome, everybody, to a brand new podcast. This is episode 1 of the Bears Haunted Stories podcast. So let me give you guys a little bit of an idea of what we're going to go through here. So this show is going to be on YouTube and several other podcast outlets. So wherever you get your podcast, you can pick this up. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, rate, all the good stuff, right? That's what helps us get this out there. So let's go over what we do here, and then we're going to get right into this very first episode here, which is going to be extremely exciting. So what we're going to be doing is going over just weird locations, haunted locations, creepy locations, macabre locations, locations with just a very bizarre story that people might think, that's a little weird. And, it's just something that goes into a little bit of depth, detail, the very beginnings, what happened before, what happened after, what are things that went on that surrounded the entire story prior, and what happened to the story after things were discovered and it went down. So this is kind of, that type of podcast. And I think it's going to be really fun. This first episode here is it was actually something that was on my mind about doing. And I'd done some research on some other things. This one kept popping out at me, and I'm like, you know what? Let me dig into this. As I started digging in, I realized there's a lot to this story than just what's out there, what's in the media, what is been told about this. There's so many puzzle pieces, and it almost becomes complicated. There's a lot that I can't even put in here because it's just too much. However, I'm still going to get to the gist, to the nitty-gritty of the actual story. You're going to get an idea, and you're going to be able to take this and you're going to be able to go off and do your own research to fill in the gaps of information, but you're going to get the most important parts of the story. And the first story that we're going to be going over is the Amityville horror house. I want to start from the very beginning, you guys. And now note, those of you guys that are watching me here on YouTube, you're going to see me look down. There's so much. I had to take a bunch of notes. So a lot of this I'm going to be taking off of the notes that I took. And I've got some actual pictures. I don't have photos of the actual, from the actual investigation in terms of the bodies and things like that we're going to get into later. I didn't want, I didn't want the victims to be put out there like that. If you want to go out and search it, you're more than welcome to. That's on you. I've seen the photos myself. I just didn't want to put that out here on my channel. I do have a photo from the Notorious Day, but let's get into it, you guys. Let's get into it. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm going to be putting those pictures up periodically as we go through this story. There's not a lot of photos, but there's some to where you're going to get the idea. So let's get into it, you guys. Where is Amityville? Okay, Amityville is a little town on Long Island in New York City. Okay, the Amityville house. The history of this house began in 1924. The house was originally built by John and Catherine Moynihan, and they built the home at 112 Ocean Avenue, So the actual address of the home was 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville on Long Island in New York. Um, this family lived in this home for a long, long time. Uh, and the house was built on waterfront property. Um, and it was God, this was a big home for back then. This would have been considered a mansion. Okay. Um, and 6 bedrooms, 3 stories, had its own dock on the river. Um, colonial style house, and I'm actually putting a picture up of the house of what it originally looked like um, back in its original form here, right? There's been some renovations that have been done to it since then, but this is essentially what it looked like. These 2 windows that you actually see on the top, they kind of call them the eyes, right? They were kind of the mythical about this house. They said it looked like eyes, and ooh, right? But anyway, this is the picture of the house, and they they built this home. They raised their family at this home. They lived there for almost the descendants of this family almost lived there for 40 years. Um, and the descendants of the Moynihan family, they finally sold the home to the DeFeos in the 60s. And the DeFeo family, who consisted of Ronald DeFeo Sr., Louise DeFeo, Don DeFeo, Allison DeFeo, Mark DeFeo, John DeFeo, and Ronald DeFeo Jr., also known as Butch. Excuse me. The DeFeo family actually renovated it. They landscaped. They changed some of the landscape of the property. They installed a swimming pool. They made it their own. This family, however, they were apparently extremely dysfunctional. They usually Ronald DeFeo Sr. apparently would use violence to act out his frustrations. So he would use violence to try to just be the man of the home. Like he was just, he figured he had to keep his manhood. He had to keep his prominent stature in the room high. So if you disobeyed him in any way, usually it ended pretty badly for you that day. And so resolving problems and situations, well, they used violence to do that. He was just very harsh, especially on the oldest son, Ronald DeFeo Jr., also known as Butch. He just real problematic to him. Extremely hard on him. Just plain mean. Same as the mom. There was before they actually had moved into this house, there was a situation where Senior, also known as Big Ron, he had actually beat up Louise pretty badly, and actually commissioned a song from a singer, and showed her the song, and then convinced her that he was going to change, and he wasn't going to do that no more, and so she wound up taking him back. And one of the ways that he was going to make things right was he was going to buy them a home. He wound up buying this house, and it was just a very, very tough situation in this home. Friends witnessed the violence of this man. Of course, he never changed, right? He never changed. I think a lot of you guys out there understand that usually when somebody's of that nature, they don't usually change, right? Because they're just extremely angry people, and um, that's how they resolve their problems. So, um, it was reported that Ronald Jr. or Butch, they said he was using drugs, a lot of alcohol, which I didn't. A lot of the witness accounts for Ronald Jr. was that he didn't use a lot of drugs. He actually drank more alcohol than anything, and uh, he was also very angry when he drank. It was a Jekyll and Hyde situation. He would just completely flip on itself, and would wind up um just you know one of them things. So um eventually all of this came to head 9 years, okay, 9 years after the DeFeo family moved in. And the exact date of what we are currently discussing is November 13th, 1974. So they purchased the home, um, 9 years prior to this. So you figure John DeFeo, who was the youngest of the family, nine, um, he was most likely born in this house. I don't know this for sure, but I'm just assuming he was 9 years old, so it had to be pretty damn close. Um, and what ended up going down was on the night of November 13th, 1974. Ronald DeFeo Jr. Ran into his favorite bar, which was called Henry's Bar, in Long Island at 6:30 p.m. Just started yelling out, "Help me! I think my parents have been shot." He was super distraught. People at first was like, "Is he out of his mind? Is he being serious?" And and long story short, he convinced five of the patrons there at the bar to go back with him to the house, and they drove over there. Apparently, it was super fast. He was just driving extremely quick. Wound up getting to the house, um, and um, he refused to go in. He said, "I'm not going in there. I'm not going back inside that house. I'm not going back in there." And so the five guys that came with him, they all decided, well, we're going to go in and we're going to check this out. When they went inside the home, uh, that's when they actually had found both of the parents shot. Okay, the uh, the father was shot in 2 times, laying face down in the bed. The mother was shot 2 times. Ronald DeFeo Sr. So Ronald DeFeo Sr. was shot 2 times in the bed, laying face down. Luis DeFeo was also shot 2 times, laying face down in the bed. It was at this point that the one of the guys ran back downstairs, grabbed the phone, called 911, said that there had been a murder. Police came, and this is when the story starts to unfold. Um, so at first, okay, uh, what was pretty interesting was that when the police arrived, of course, the first bedroom they went into was the parents' bedroom because that's where the guys had found him. Found first. They hadn't even gone through the rest of the house. The police went into the parents' bedroom. Of course, found them murdered. They wound up sweeping the home, and they ended up going into one of the other rooms. And that was when they had seen that um, Mark and John had both been shot and murdered as well. So this now became um, a murder, 4-person murder case, right? They originally called it in. They called the coroner, and the coroner said 4 bodies. And they said, "Yep, 4 bodies." So the coroner was going off of that information. They wound up going to another room. They ended up finding Allison DeFeo, and found out she was also shot and killed. And they traveled upstairs to the 3rd floor, which is where Dawn DeFeo was, and found out she was murdered. So the officer ended up having to call the coroner back again and letting them know, hey, this is actually a 6-person murder. There's actually 6 victims. So it's unheard of at this point, right? So 2 murders, it could happen, right? 4 murders is a lot. 6 murders, it's unheard of. Okay, 6 murders, 1 location of this nature. Okay, you guys out there have to think about it. Okay, this happened in the middle of the night, and every single victim was laying in bed. So whoever did this went room by room, and it was all done with a .35 Marlin rifle. Loud. There's a little bit of a twist to this, but we're going to get into it later. For now, we're going to stick with this. .35 Marlin. Okay, it's a loud gun, man. It's a hunting rifle. So they, they end up, if you're watching YouTube, again, I'm putting up a picture of the DeFeo family here. These are all the kids that you actually see on here. And this next one that I'm putting up here is Ronald Sr. and Ronald Jr. And then here's a picture of the police actually taking out a body. It's a bigger body, so I'm assuming it's either a parent or one of the older siblings. That's about as gruesome as I'm going to get with this. But anyway, this had become a very important case right off the bat, very, very quickly, right? So you've got 6 bodies, never heard of in this neck of the woods. This is a very prominent neighborhood, very, very prominent neighborhood. And so they end up taking Ronald Jr. into protective custody, okay? Because he's the only sibling left. Everybody else is dead now. You've got 6 people murdered. And they end up taking him into protective custody. When they and originally they didn't take him into custody because they believed that he was the murderer. They took him into custody because they didn't know if this family had a hit on them or what. And they wanted to make sure that he was safe. So they took him into protective custody. Obviously, from there, they start questioning him on what had actually happened, how he came across the bodies and things of this nature. Several stories started coming out that they just didn't hash out, right? They they ended up finding out that he owned a .35 Marlin, and they had already determined that, and I'm fast forwarding a little bit here by a couple of days at this point, right? They found out that he had owned a .35 Marlin. They found a shell underneath the parents' bed that was missed, and that's how they were able to figure out that this was a .35. And when they went into Butch's closet, they found a box. Obviously, these rounds weren't spent. It was a full box, but it was enough to uh, convince the police that he might have been the one that was involved with the shooting. But he had claimed that it was the mafia that actually had a hit out um, for the family. Now, that might sound a little far fetched. However, there's a connection that would make the story not so far fetched, right? So, uh, Mike Briganti, who was actually Louise DeFeo, the mother, it was her father. Okay, um, he actually had owned a Buick car dealership that Butch DeFeo actually had worked with, and um, that it had become discovered that that dealership was potentially connected with uh, the Gambino mob family, mafia family. If you don't know who the Gambinos are, you guys are in the dark. One of the largest um, mafia families to exist in New York, major. Um, and so the Ronald DeFeo Jr. claimed that this might have been a hit, and he pointed out to somebody, and it just so happened that somebody called the house. They picked up the cop picked up the phone, and that made man didn't know that he was talking to the police. And then when he realized he was talking to the police, he hung up. That was it. So they had a reason to think that he might have actually been involved with this. But when they found these 35 cartridges in his closet, in Butch's closet, they determined that this whole thing with the mob might have actually been made up, and that it was actually him that conducted these murders. The thing was, they didn't have a gun. They had no idea where the gun was. And um, so you fast forward, Ronald DeFeo ends up um, getting arrested, had his rights read to him, that he was, at that point going to be arrested for for 6 murders of his family members. And he starts going off. Now news stories start to come out. He goes to court. His lawyer was William Weber, or he went by Bill Weber, and for that we'll call him Bill. Did everything he could. He really did everything he could to get this guy off this case, and it looked like it was going to be apparent that he was going to lose. So they wound up trying to get him on insanity. That it happened through insanity, and when the prosecution started pushing Butch real hard on the stands, Butch folded and admitted to everything because he's just, upset about the whole thing. Whatever, right? The jury ends up finding him guilty on all 6 counts, and he actually wound up with 6 life sentences of 25 years each, with a minimum of 150 years, and he did have eligibility for parole. And now this is where things start to get real interesting. So now you guys got a great picture of what actually went down, what started this house into this direction. This was a beautiful home. Beautiful neighborhood. These things never happen in these neighborhoods. And now you're going to start to hear where things start to get a little weird. exactly 2 weeks after Ronald DeFeo Jr. was convicted, okay, on December 18th, 1975. Okay, so almost a year, uh, uh, little month, about a month over a year, right? Uh, After the murders had taken place, uh, George and Kathy Lutz, and they had 3 children. They wound up purchasing the home, okay, at 112 Ocean Avenue, and they wound up moving in. Now, this particular family, there's no way they could have afforded a home like this in its normal capacity. No way. Um, he didn't really have one of those real good jobs. He just got married. Him and um, uh, George and Kathy, they had just gotten married. And however, I mean, again, I need to remind you guys, this was a huge house. This was a Dutch colonial 6-bedroom mansion on waterfront property. Um, it had kind of a gothic feel because it had a really dark paint job. Uh, but because of the dark and tragic history that this home had, um, due to the DeFeo family murders, they purchased this home for for right around $80,000. You guys, $80,000. It's cheap. Back then, a house of this nature should have went easily for $300,000 to $500,000 in 1975. This is a mansion. Um, After only a month, the house was abandoned. 28 days exactly is how long the Lutz family lasted in this home. They left all of their possessions, everything. Just it was literally just like they just looked at each other, grabbed whatever it was that they needed, and then left. Okay, dishes still in the sink, laundry still needed to be washed. They left everything, and this is where things start to go. The Lutz family had actually claimed that demonic manifestations was completely riddling their family. It included strange sounds, levitations. Um, they claimed that there was a pig, a pig with blood red eyes that they would see through the windows. Uh, they they claimed there was green slime that would actually come out from the wall, sweat from the walls. Uh, a priest claiming that he had suffered blisters on his hands when he tried to enter the home. A hidden satanic red room. Um, the doors blowing off of the hinges. Flies that would completely overtake a room. And it just, the list went on and on. That they were just saying that this was just the darkest house in history. 2 years after the Lutz left his home, in 1977, an author named Jay Anson, he released a book called The Amityville Horror: A True Story. The publisher claimed that it was a nonfiction book and a version of the blockbuster hit The Exorcist. Now, you guys, The Exorcist had just come out just a couple of years prior to this. Okay, and The Exorcist was a huge blockbuster hit, huge. Um, and they said the book was based on 35 hours of taped commentary of the Lutz family, and on top of that, it sold over 3 million copies. And this is over some 13 different printings. 3 million copies. Uh, Later, Jay Anson actually confessed that he did not verify any of these stories. He just wrote them down from the tapes that he was given. That was based off of 35 hours of taped commentary of the Lutz family. And then later, it was followed up by the first movie in 1979, which was based off of the book. Okay. Now, through this whole entire process, okay, at this point, the Lutz family, the Jay Anson, Bill Weber, all of these people that were involved. This house is haunted. This house is haunted. This house is haunted. It's a terrible home. They end up saying that a priest came into the home. George and Kathy said that they'd had a priest come in, and he was scared to death of the home and wound up having to be ran out. They later found this priest, and the priest actually confessed that he had never even been in the home. He never stepped foot there. He never went there. They wound up having a news crew come out and had a paranormal team come out and investigate this home. Their names were Ed and Lorraine Warren. Okay. Now, Ed and Lorraine Warren had already kind of started making some headway with well, just to give you just a quick little tidbit, okay? Ed and Lorraine Warren is the people that found Annabelle. If you don't know who Annabelle is, there is a lot of movies based off of this doll. That was one of their very first things that they started kind of gaining some fame with, right? They investigated a witch family home, which I'm actually going to get into on another story. In 1971, they did that. And then came Amityville. Amityville is essentially what put these two on the map. This was their big claim to fame. And they went into the home. They were the first paranormal team. The first paranormal team in the history of this house to go in and investigate this home after the murders. The media followed them into the home, followed the entire investigation. They did a seance in the home. Now note, you guys, that this home had remained empty up to this point. Still had the furniture in it from the family. Was reported Lorraine walked into one of the rooms and said that, "I hope this is the closest to hell that I'll ever be." The only thing that could be potentially garnished as paranormal from this investigation that the reporter was willing to admit to, he said that he felt nothing the entire time. They were there up until 3 a.m. And then around 3 a.m., they got a knock on the door, and it turned out it was the police. They wound up opening the door to police. They informed them that, the police informed them that they had gotten some complaints from the neighbors that somebody was in the home when the home was empty. They ensured the police that they were invited to be there, which they were, and ended up, being left to their wares. They ended up staying there till dawn. And he said that he literally felt nothing. He said the only thing that he could say that he could say was a little bit weird was this camera guy actually had a little bit of a heart issue going up the stairs. Now, this 3-bedroom house, I could probably tell you I would too. But he said other than that, it wasn't enough to where he had to be taken off the job. And then this photo. Now, according to Ed and Lorraine Warren and one of the other reporters that was there were 0 kids in this house. And the camera that's taking this photo here was actually on a timer to take pictures periodically throughout the night. And they claimed that there was no children left in the home. Later, they actually taken this photo and sent it to one of the DeFeo's close family friends, and they determined that they believed that was John DeFeo, that might have been the ghost of John DeFeo. I don't know. You tell me. Anyway, they basically, Ed and Lorraine Warren claimed that this house was extremely, extremely haunted. That this was one of the most demonic homes they had ever been into. And at this point, they had actually been in thousands of homes. They had their own paranormal society for many, many years prior to this. So they had been investigating. They were making a living doing this. And a lot of things just didn't add up, in my opinion, and we're going to get into that. This is something that I want to put out there as a note to everybody. Jay Anson made a lot of money from selling the books to selling the rights to the movie. All this stuff. George Lutz was right there with him. George and Kathy Lutz. They also made a lot of money. Ed and Lorraine Warren received tons of fame and prestige. Tons of publicity from this story. Tons. It put them on the map. This is the story that put Ed and Lorraine Warren in the eyesight of future paranormal investigators. TV shows that you see on TV now, they all talk about Ed and Lorraine Warren. The inspiration, and this is where it began. This right here is what set them in. This, in my opinion, is one of the most famous possession cases of all time, because they actually eventually, let me say this. The Lutz family enjoyed both the fame from being demonically haunted, and the thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars that flowed from the book and movie contracts. Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s lawyer benefited a whole lot from this as well. He tried to go back and tried to get retrials done on this. He was involved in he actually had tried to claim insanity by using the excuse that evil spirits had driven Ronald DeFeo Jr. to kill his family. And he's one of the ones that helped out with this whole story. Uh, the the jury threw it out. Ronald DeFeo wasn't going to use the excuse. They weren't going to use the excuse for Ronald DeFeo Jr. and that was that. Uh, and then this is where things get a little crazy. Okay, things wind up going bad for Bill Weber. Okay, Bill Weber wound up losing connections with the Lutz family because they weren't getting along. They were suing each other left and right, with Jay Anson, Bill Weber, the Lutz family. Everybody was suing each other all over the rights, all over the money for this whole thing. Let me make sure I get this right. In 1999, well, it wasn't. Actually, it wasn't. It was. You know what? I don't have the exact date on it. Let me just say this. Bill Weber calls up the Long Island newspaper. There was a journalist named Joel Martin. Now, Joel Martin was the first reporter to report on this, and he actually became the most important reporter on this entire case through the entire history of it, from the time of the murders up until today. Okay. Bill Weber, which is Butch's attorney, called up the Long Island newspaper, told the editor something. The editor goes back to Joel Martin, says, Joel, I've got a story for you. Oh, okay. What is it? Amityville. Oh my God. It can't be anything serious. He's like, what am I going to talk about that I hadn't talked about already? Well, Bill Weber wants to talk about how they came up with the hoax, how they came up with the stories. Oh, that is a story, right? Now it's a huge story. So he winds up sitting down with Bill Weber, and Bill Weber breaks the entire thing down. Okay. So if you remember, we were talking about a few things that the Lutz family had claimed, okay? Bill Weber claimed that the Lutz family, or George and Kathy, sat down with him at a table. Sat down with Bill Weber at a table, drinking glasses of wine, and they decided they were just going to come up with a story. How can we make this happen, right? And a lot of this had something to do with Bill Weber wanting to get Butch the insanity plea due to possession as well as money, right? And Bill Weber said that they came up with the slime theory, the green slime, right? Remember we mentioned the green slime? When the police went in to investigate the home after the murders, they used a series of powders, right, to try to get fingerprints, see if they can pull something. One of the powders that they were using happened to be green, okay, and it was all over the house. So they said, well, what if we just call it green slime, right? You guys are stumbling across green slime. Yeah, that'll work. Then they decided, okay, well, what else can we use? And Bill says, well, you know what? This neighbor's cat. I remember Butch talking about this cat, how he couldn't stand this cat. Turned out the next door neighbor had a really fat Siamese cat. That cat's a fat pig. Get that fat pig off of my house. He's always walking around near my window. So he decided that, well, what if we called this a fat pig, a red pig? They named it Jody. They named this demon Jody. why don't we name this cat the fat pig? You know, and when lights hit a cat's eyes in a certain way, it turns them red. It makes it look red, especially in the dark. That's how they came up with the pig with blood red eyes. And they then took it a step further, right? And the red room, the red satanic room. Well, as it turns out, the girls that were in the house actually would use this red room. It was like a secondary room off of one of the other closets. And the girls would go in there and they would play with their Barbie dolls and their toys. And it was basically a playroom for the kids. That was all it was. There was no satanic rituals in there, and it just happened to be painted red. And he basically broke it down that this is how it all began. This is the real story of the Amityville Horror. This is how Bill Weber was putting it. He was basically saying that everybody that was involved was in on this story to keep this story going, because how could we not take advantage of these terrible murders? And later on, it was found when George Lutz ended up passing away that he was actually the chairman of an LLC that was named for the Amityville Horrors. So it turned out that anything that actually went out that was based off of the Amityville Horrors or the house, he owned part of the rights for. So he got rights, movie rights, book rights, you name it. He got money for it for his entire life. And his entire life he claimed that this house was demonic till the day he died. And just a side note, interesting side note that I actually had found. The GPS coordinates of this home happens to be 40.666. Coincidence? I have no idea. Ronald DeFeo Jr. has been telling the same story. The only one that he's actually told on a regular basis, many, many times over, is that he actually didn't kill everybody in that house. That the actual person, that the only person that he had killed in that home was Dawn. And it's been long believed that Dawn actually was the perpetrator, the actual murderer. And it turned out that there was also a .38 caliber pistol involved. Later on, coroner reports were let go, and and it determined that one of the victims actually had an extra bullet hole, and they believe that it is indeed plausible that Dawn may have actually committed these murders. And the reasoning for it is because Dawn, the mother, and I believe as a family friend, had tickets to Florida, and Dawn actually had a boyfriend over there. And they were set to go to Florida a couple of weeks prior or after this. Something wound up getting stopped. They believe she flipped a loop and had enough of it. They eventually found the gun in the harbor. There was some corruption, potential corruption that went on, alleged corruption, I should properly say it. I don't know for sure, but they believe that there was possible corruption in the finding of this gun. They think that they actually swept the area, and then drew a diagram, and then claimed that it was Butch that actually drew the diagram. There's rumors that he didn't actually draw it, that the cops actually drew it. I don't know any of that, but they did indeed find the gun, and they proved that gun was actually part of the murder. But he believed that he killed Dawn out of self-defense. He said he walked into Dawn's room, asked her what the hell has she done, and she basically was saying, why did you kill the kids? Because he loved those kids. Butch loved those kids, and long story short, ended up getting into a tussle with her because she didn't want him alive either, because she wouldn't be able to tell her story to save her own skin. And he wound up pushing her on the bed and then took the rifle and shot her. And he claims that was just simply out of self-defense. He said that he didn't kill all of them. Either way, he went down for all 6 of the murders. They found him guilty. I don't know what the real story is. That's just the story that I was able to read up, and it was actually something that I found multiple times. Obviously, a lot of people that are guilty will say whatever it is they need to get out of trouble. I don't know. But there's a lot of lore around this house, and I always found this to be interesting. The house did eventually sell again. And the current family that actually lives in the home came out on the record and said, I wish people would stop coming here because we have never had any incidents in this home whatsoever. Never a problem, never a weird feeling. I just wish they even managed to get the address changed so people couldn't find it. It would be a lot harder for people to find. It's not hard to find, right? Because you can always go to old maps and see it. But either way, they did their best. They remodeled the home a little bit. They covered up they filled in the swimming pool, things of that nature. So, it's just an interesting story in my opinion, right? Like, it's always going to have that kind of weird, kind of macabre feeling, right? Because of just the deaths that took place there. 6 people passed away. Right now I'm showing a picture of the DeFeo family grave, of everybody there, and I at the end of the day, 6 people lost their lives, and and I hope they rest in peace. Um, you know, what's the true story? I don't know. I don't know. And this story is actually a lot more complicated than what even I'm able to put together, that I'm able to put here on this podcast, because there's just not enough time. And a lot of people involved, a lot of situations. I gave you guys just a simple little nutshell. It's a hell of a lot more complicated than it seems, really. But I gave you enough to be able to go off of, and you guys make up your own minds about it. Some people still think that place is demonic. Other people are like, maybe we should leave them alone. But at the end of the day, this particular home is one of the biggest, most important houses in paranormal history in terms of the United States, right, in America. And the next one being the Exorcism House. Am I going to report on that? You bet. You bet. And I'm going to try to dig up as much beginning history as I can, because I think that's important to realize that the first family that built this home lived there for over 40 years, almost 40 years. And then they ended up selling the home. And then bad things happen. And then everything after that is just a huge rush of stuff. A lot of movies have been filmed about this house. A lot of, a few books have been written about this house. So you guys can make up your own mind. But hey, this is my story, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. This podcast on the Amityville horror houses, and you guys come back and see me again on episode 2. I really appreciate you guys listening. You guys, please like, share, subscribe, comment, rate, all the good stuff on all the platforms that you can. You can catch me on all the podcast formats. You can catch me on YouTube. And I want to thank you guys so much, and we'll see you guys next week on episode 2. You guys take care. Have a great day. And stay healthy, you guys. Take care.